Hello, Carl, again from Recording Studio Oxford, where the heat is something else. Yeah, trust you are having a good time. Last time we visited the Jungle Book, we finished the story of Kotick the White Seal. Now we come to a rather more famous story, the story of Rikki, Tikki, Tavi. At the hole where he went in, Red Eye called Wrinkleskin, hear what little Red Eye saith, nag come up and dance with death. Eye to eye and head to head, keep the measure, nag. This shall end when one is dead, at thy pleasure, nag. Turn for turn and twist to twist, run and hide thee, nag. Ha, the hooded death hath missed. Woe betide thee, nag. This is the story of the great war that Rikki Tikki Tavi fought single-handed through the bathrooms of the big bungalow in the Sigoli cantonment. Darzi, the tailor bird, helped him, and Chuchundra, the muskrat, who never comes out in the middle of the floor, but always creeps round by the wall, gave him advice. But Rikki Tikki did the real fighting. He was a mongoose, rather like a little cat in his fur and his tail, but quite like a weasel in his head and his habits. His eyes and the end of his restless nose were pink. He could scratch himself wherever he pleased with any leg, front or back, that he chose to use. He could fluff his tail so it looked like a battle brush. And his war cry as he scuttled through the long grass was, Rikki, Tikki, Tikki, Tikki. One day, a high summer flood washed him out of the burrow where he lived with his father and mother, carried him, kicking and clucking down a roadside ditch. He found a little wisp of grass floating there and clung to it till he lost his senses. When he revived, he was lying in the hot sun in the middle of a garden path, very draggled indeed, and a small boy was saying, Here's a dead mongoose. Let's have a funeral. No, said his mother, we should take him home and dry him. Perhaps he isn't really dead. So they took him into the house, and a big man picked him up between his finger and thumb and said he was not dead, but half choked. So they wrapped him in cotton wool and warmed it over a little fire, and he opened his eyes and sneezed. Now, said the big man, he was an Englishman who'd just moved into the bungalow, don't frighten him, and we'll see what he'll do. It is the hardest thing in the world to frighten a mongoose, because he's eaten up from toes to nail with curiosity. The motto of all the mongoose family is run and find out, and Rikki Tikki was a true mongoose. He looked at the cotton wool, decided it was not good to eat, ran all around the table, sat up and put his fur in order, scratched himself, and jumped on the small boy's shoulder. Don't be frightened, Teddy, said his father, that's his way of making friends. Ouch, he's tickling my chin, said Teddy. Rikki Tikki looked down between the boy's collar and neck, snuffed his ear, and climbed up down to the floor where he sat rubbing his nose. Goodness gracious, said Teddy's mother, and that's a wild creature. I suppose he's so tame because we've been kind to him. All mongooses are like that, said her husband. If Teddy doesn't pick him up by the tail or try to put him in a cage, he'll run in and out of the house all day long. Let's give him something to eat. They gave him a little piece of raw meat. Rikki Tikki liked it immediately, and when he was finished, he ran out into the veranda and sat in the sunshine and fluffed up his fur to make it dry to the roots. Then he felt better. He spent all that day roaming over the house. He nearly drowned himself in the bathtubs, put his nose on the ink in a writing table, and burned it on the end of a big man's cigar, for he climbed up to the big man's lap to see how writing was done. At nightfall he ran into Teddy's nursery to watch how kerosene lamps were lighted, and when Teddy went to bed, Rikki Tikki climbed up too. But he was a restless companion, because he had to get up and attend to every noise all through the night and find out what made it. Teddy's mother and father came in at the last thing to look at the boy, and Rikki Tikki was awake on the pillow. I don't like that, said Teddy's mother. He may bite the child. He'll do no such thing, said father. Teddy's safer with that beast than if he had a bloodhound to watch over him. If a snake should come into the nursery, but Teddy's mother would not think of anything that awful. Every morning, Rikki Tikki came to early breakfast in the veranda, riding on Teddy's shoulder, and they gave him a banana and some boiled egg. He sat on all their laps, one after the other, because every well-brought-up mongoose always hopes to be a house mongoose someday and have rooms to run about in. And Rikki Tikki's mother, she used to live in the general's house at Sigoli, had carefully told Rikki what to do if she ever came across white men. Then Rikki Tikki went out into the garden to see what was to be seen. It was a large garden, only half cultivated, with bushes as big as summer houses, of Marshall Neal roses, lime and orange trees, clumps of bamboo, and thickets of high grass. Rikki Tikki licked his lips. This is a splendid hunting ground, he said, and his tail grew bottle brushy at the thought of it, and he scuttled up and down in the garden, snuffing here and there, till he heard very sorrowful voices in a thorn bush. It was Darzy, the tailor bird, and his wife. They had made a beautiful nest by pulling 2 leaves together and stitching them up the edges with fibres, and had filled the hollow with cotton and downy fluff. The nest swayed to and fro as they sat on the rim and cried. "What's the matter?" asked Rikki Tikki. "We are very miserable," said Darzy. "One of our babies fell out of the nest yesterday, and Nag ate him." Said Rikki Tikki. "That is very sad, but I am a stranger here. Who is Nag?" Darzy and his wife only cowered down in the nest without answering, for from the thick grass at the foot of the bush there came a low hiss, a horrid cold sound that made Rikki Tikki jump back 2 clear feet. Then inch by inch out of the grass rose up the head and spread hood of Nag, the big black cobra, and he was 5 feet long from tongue to tail. When he had lifted 1/3 of himself clear off the ground, he stood balancing to and fro exactly as a dandelion tuft balances in the wind, and he looked Rikki Tikki with the wicked snake's eyes that never change their expression, whatever the snake may be thinking of. "Who is Nag?" said he. "I am Nag. The great god Brahm put his mark upon all of our people, when the first cobra spread his hood to keep the sun off Brahm as he slept. Look and be afraid." He spread out his hood more than ever, and Rikki Tikki saw the spectacle mark on the back of it that looks exactly like the eye part of a hood and eye fastening. He was afraid for the minute, for it is impossible for a mongoose to stay frightened for any length of time, and though Rikki Tikki had never met a live cobra before, his mother had fed him on dead ones, and he knew that all a grown mongoose business in life was to fight and eat snakes. Nag knew that too, and at the bottom of his cold heart he was afraid. "Well," said Rikki Tikki as his tail began to fluff up again, "marks or no marks, do you think it right for you to eat fledglings out of their nest?" Nag was thinking to himself and watching the least movement in the grass behind Rikki Tikki. He knew that mongooses in the garden meant death sooner or later for him and his family, but he wanted to get Rikki Tikki off his guard, so he dropped his head a little and put him one side. "Let us talk," he said. "You eat eggs. Why should I not eat birds?" "Behind you! Look behind you!" sang Darzy. Rikki Tikki knew better than to waste time staring. He jumped up in the air as high as he could go, and just under him whizzed by the head of Nagina, Nag's wicked wife. She had crept up behind him as he was talking to make an end of him. He heard a savage hiss as her stroke missed. He came down almost across her back, and if he'd been an old mongoose, he'd have known that was when the time to break her back with one bite, but he was afraid of the terrible lashing return stroke of the cobra. He bit indeed, but did not bite long enough, and he jumped clear of the whisking tail, leaving Nagina torn and angry. "Wicked, wicked Darzy," said Nag, lashing up as high as he could reach towards the nest in the thorn bush. But Darzy had built it well out of the reach of snakes, and it only swayed to and fro. Rikki Tikki felt his eyes growing red and hot, and when a mongoose's eyes grow red, he's angry, and he sat back on his tail and hind legs like a kangaroo, and looked all around him and chattered with rage. But Nag and Nagina had disappeared into the grass. When a snake misses its stroke, it never says anything, or gives any sign of what it means to do next. Rikki Tikki did not care to follow them, for he did not always feel sure that he could manage 2 snakes at once. So he trotted off to the gravel path near the house and sat down to think. It was a very serious matter for him. Now, if you read the old books of natural history, Carl, you will find they say that when the mongoose fights the snake and happens to get bitten, he runs off and eats some herbs that cure him. That is not true. The victory is only a matter of quickness of eye and quickness of foot. Snake's blow against mongoose jump. And as no eye can follow the motion of a snake's head when it strikes, this makes things much more wonderful than any magic herb. Rikki Tikki knew he was a young mongoose, and it made him all the more pleased to think that he managed to escape a blow from behind. It gave him confidence, and when Teddy came running down the path, Rikki Tikki was ready to be petted. But just as Teddy was stooping, something wriggled little in the dust, and a tiny voice said, "Be careful, I am Death." It was Karait, the dusty brown snakeling that lies for choice in the dusty earth, and its bite is dangerous as the cobra's, but he's so small that no one thinks of him, and so he does much more harm to people. Rikki Tikki's eyes grew red again, and he danced up to Karait with a peculiar rocking, swaying motion that he had inherited from his family. It looks very funny, but it is so perfectly balanced a gait that you can fly off from it at any angle you please, and in dealing with snakes this is an advantage. If Rikki Tikki had only known that he was doing a much more dangerous thing than fighting Nag, for Karait is so small and can turn so quickly that unless Rikki bit him close to the back of his head, he would get the return stroke in his eye or his lip. But Rikki Tikki did not know. His eyes were all red, and he rocked back and forth, looking for a good place to hold. Karait struck out, Rikki jumped sideways and tried to run in, but the wicked little dusty grey head lashed within a fraction of his shoulder, and he had to jump over the body and head followed his heels close.